Have you ever looked into a toxic mirror? Old Cove Road is a show about social media's effects on mental health and our sense of community. I've been doing a lot of research on this topic, and in the episodes so far, I've tried to highlight some of the positives. This is largely because I believe social media is not all bad, and the general conversation about social media in the mainstream is mostly skewed toward the negative. This, by the way, is generally the way that we consume news. Think about your local nightly news. What do they talk about? Car crashes, crimes of the day, other trouble in the community, and maybe a bit about weather and sports. When looking at articles online, the negative slant is no different with social media. Maybe this is not totally a bad thing though. There's some value to openly talking about the potential dangers and the bad stuff on social media platforms so that we can be more aware and learn how to protect ourselves. Today's episode is on a topic that seems to be touched on in pretty much everything I'm reading. What is social media doing to young folks' body image? On the show, we'll explore eating-related disorders and how living in an online world can both hurt and be helpful. My name is Chris Morandi, and this is Old Cove Road.
If I told you what I'm really thinking, you wouldn't listen for long. Yeah, you'd ask me if I'd been drinking. No, I tell you, you couldn't be more wrong.
In order to set the table for our discussion, I think it's important to talk with a professional. Libby Lyons is a certified eating disorder specialist through the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals and has been practicing for over a decade. She was kind enough to join me for a conversation, and I started by asking her to describe some basic eating disorders.
Sure. So really, we have basic subcategories of eating disorders. So really it's anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder are really the three subtypes that we look at. And we're so excited as clinicians now, right, that the binge eating disorder is classified in the DSM-5, which is our Bible of classification for insurance. So really anorexia nervosa is when a person is really just refusing to eat or having really significant fears of major food groups or types of food. So really a person that is engaging in this type of eating behavior, especially for like a teenager or a college student, may just begin to stop eating certain types of food. And sometimes this starts with just a diet they want to engage in. Could be like a paleo diet, or it could be a clean eating diet that really seems to kind of be the rage right now with a lot of teens is I'm going to try the Whole30 or I'm going to try to eat clean. So they may just start cutting out major food groups. They may get their family involved as well. I've had some clients that come in and their families like really encourage that, and they say, wow, we were really not eating healthy, and wow, our daughter or son really got us into doing this, and boy, it's been a really great thing, but not noticing that their child's been losing maybe a really significant amount of weight in a very short amount of time. And so that then kind of starts this roller coaster of significant weight loss, maybe more restriction, maybe higher levels of exercise that turns into just obsessive exercise where it could be an hour to 2 to 3 hours a day. Sometimes if people are engaged in sports as well, like track or swimming, they're working out outside of what their coach is dictating as well. So there's just real obsession around their body, around their food, around how they eat, what they eat. Bulimia can be a little harder, I think, for parents to pick up on because we're so tuned in, I think, more to anorexia than bulimia in today's society. Bulimia, usually a person is a little bit more, I guess I would say, quote, and I hate to use this phrase, but normal-sized in our society. Mm-hmm. They tend to engage in binging and purging activities, meaning they will eat large amounts of quantities of food. And then purging could be either self-induced vomiting, either using like your fingers or an object, and that's usually right after a binge within an hour. Or it could be use of over-exercise as well. It could be using laxatives or diuretics. It doesn't necessarily have to be through self-vomiting, but that's the most common way that people will purge what they binge on.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it frames our conversation today nicely. I'm interested in your thoughts about how eating disorders develop. Although I'm a therapist, I don't have much experience working with folks struggling in this way. I will say, though, that I have a lot of experience around domestic violence issues, specifically working with domestic violence offenders. And with their behavior, we talk about feelings of loss of control, and their manipulative and abusive tactics are largely about their desperate need to gain power and control. Are these eating-related behaviors similar in that way? How do people who develop characteristics of eating-related disorders get there?
So really, when we work with eating disorders, it starts around the age of 8 or 9. Most clients will come in and say, I noticed, and it's really not different for boys or girls or men or women when they come in, noticed around the age 8 or 9 that something was different about them, whether that was external or internal. They noticed about that age range, prior to puberty starting, something was different, whether it was the way they looked, whether it was the way they felt, something just was different about them. And this could be a trauma experience, this could be a bullying experience, it could be both, it could be self-esteem related, doesn't really matter, but it's something is just different. And it starts a different train of thinking for them that then pushes this want for control, which I think you mentioned beautifully there a minute ago, that they want a sense of control within their life. And just like any other mental health disorder, you reach for something that's going to work, just a coping skill. And for them, it's the eating disorder. And really, like substance abuse, like domestic violence, like other issues that all of us work with, it's learning that it attacks onto the best parts of themselves. So the things that make them fantastic athletes, the things that make them wonderful at academics, the things that make them fantastic at their hobbies also make for fantastic eating disorders.
Oh, interesting. I haven't really thought of that before. All right. So the question that I'm really after today is social media contributing to these eating disorders. Is it a good place or a bad place when talking about this kind of stuff? Can it be used for good? I don't know. What do you think?
So I think it can be healthy and unhealthy. I think social media can be a great place to do positive campaigns. I think you can get out there and do like body positive social media campaigns. So like Dove is a great campaigner right now for let's be healthy with our body sizes. Let's fight all the negative campaigns there are about diets and beauty products and things that, hit kids at an early age for changing the way they look. Like, let's accept our bodies as how they are, and I know they have their own products for body care, but they do a great job. They do a really good job about trying to campaign for just being who you are. And they use social media to do that. On the kind of more negative side, social media can be used to bully kids in a very harsh way. Kids are mean. I guess I'll say that. Kids can be very mean, and it doesn't give you a break like we used to have, at least when I was younger. We didn't have phones. We didn't have social media. And so when you went to school and came home, you didn't really see anybody outside of school unless you wanted to play with them and go outside and maybe ride your bikes or race the cars up and down the sidewalks or whatever. And that was kind of it. You still had bullying, of course, and you still had kids that got picked on, but you didn't have that. You had a break. You got to go home and have some relief from that at least. Kids don't have that. There's 24-hour access to videos, to pictures, to negative images and ideals and values that maybe aren't necessarily body positive.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's not it's not just black and white, definitely. What advice would you give folks, either if they're going through some of the things that we've been talking about today, or for parents that may see some of these symptoms in their kids? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, sure. Well, definitely if it's parents, if you're worried that your child is going through an eating disorder specifically, I think definitely just getting an evaluation set up through a local eating disorders clinic or therapy office. And you can honestly go to like the National Eating Disorder Association website They have a list of resources within each state that should have local offices or places you can go. So
awesome. Well, Libby Lyons, thank you so much for coming on Old Cove Road.
Oh my gosh, of course, anytime.
If you're enjoying the show so far, don't forget to press that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Also, leaving a positive review would be great. Before we continue, I just want to take a second to talk about some of the writing being highlighted on oldcoveroad.com. People from all over the world are sharing their thoughts and experiences with mental health and social media. It's definitely worth checking out. And if you have something to say on the topic, reach out on the contact page or on Twitter at oldcoverd. Okay, so I think Libby provided a pretty good base of understanding for what defines an eating disorder, some of the common life events that may lead you in that direction, and how social media can be both supportive and destructive in regards to young folks' body image. If you've been lucky enough not to experience this issue, I think it's hard to really understand the personal pressures involved, let alone the pressure social media can provide. Our next guest was kind and brave enough to share her experience with us. For 4 years, Hope Virgo managed to keep her anorexia hidden, keeping dark secrets from her friends and family. But then, in November 2007, Hope's world changed. She was admitted to a mental health hospital. Her skin was yellowing, her heart was failing, she was barely recognizable. But, after some very long and hard work, Hope was able to begin to reshape her life. She's now an author of her book entitled Stand Tall Little Girl, and a mental health advocate sharing her story to inspire others. I didn't have a lot of prearranged questions for Hope. I just asked her to tell her story.
So I first got told I had an eating disorder when I was 16. So when I was 16, I came back to school after being off for the summer holidays, and my school got in touch with my mum, and I had to go and see my GP. And my GP did a load of tests on me, and then he said, "We think you've got an eating disorder. We're going to refer you to the Mental Health Trust." And at this point, I didn't really know anything about eating disorders. I didn't really know much about anorexia, and I also just thought I didn't have it. I think my body image was so distorted that when people talk about anorexic people, you kind of imagine really skinny, people. And I looked in the mirror and didn't see that skinny person. I saw this massive, overweight girl staring back. And because I couldn't see myself how everyone else saw me, it didn't help with all that denial stuff that comes with it.
Yeah. So the doctor tells you have an eating disorder, and you don't believe them at that point. How do you think you got to the point where a doctor would diagnose you with an eating disorder?
By skipping meals, I got this sense of achievement from doing that. And the more I did it, the more I wanted to do more of it, and the better I would feel about everything. And I'd go days without eating, and I'd exercise a lot. And throughout that whole time, I guess that voice gave me this kind of value and purpose, and it just progressed from there, if I'm honest. I think for me, a lot of it was around not having to think about the real world and not have to deal with emotional stuff that had happened. I was sexually abused when I was 12, and I'd never talked about that to anyone. I felt really ashamed about it, and I'd lived with this guilt for so long that as soon as I started to skip meals and started to listen to this anorexic voice, I felt so much better about everything, and it gave me this relief. And I remember actually when I first started eating when I was in hospital, you suddenly get all these emotions that you've never had for years and years and years. And it's absolutely terrifying because you don't know you don't know what your mind's doing, and it's quite scary.
Yeah, I can imagine. When you went into the hospital and they made you start eating again, what was that like? Did you feel like you were losing control, and maybe that's why some of the emotions came out?
Yeah, it did. And yeah, I felt out of control again. And I think I was also really scared that I, for some reason, would lose all control around food and all control around emotions and everything like that just from starting to eat again. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it for me was I didn't understand why I was being made to eat when by not eating, I was feeling so much better about everything. So it kind of baffled me that I was being made to eat when people, and I didn't think anyone really understood what was going on.
Yeah. What was the conversation like around going to the hospital?
It was hard. So when I first went to CAMHS, which is the Child Adolescent Mental Health Services, I kind of just went along, kind of complied with it, mainly because I didn't want to keep having to have arguments with my mum and my dad about it. So I kind of went every week, didn't really say anything in my therapy sessions. I lied quite a lot. I also, before every single Tuesday, so that was my sessions were, before every single session on the Tuesday, I would drink loads of water and water load so that my weight wouldn't go down. And I felt kind of quite happy in myself that I was able to trick the system, and everyone thought that I was getting better and I wasn't. But then I remember the day, so that went on for about 6 months, and then eventually my heart nearly stopped, so I actually had no choice about going to hospital. And I remember kind of within 24 hours I was admitted to hospital, and I was stood in the entrance to this hospital and like couldn't get my head around what I was being made to do. I thought I was really cross with my mum, I was really upset, and all this emotion that I'd never felt for like years and years suddenly hit me, and I was like begging my mum. I was like, I'll come home, I'll start eating again, I promise, like I'll do whatever I like need to do. But at that point I didn't have a choice about it at all. When I first arrived, I was still in quite a lot of denial about the fact that anything was wrong with me. And so the first few days were very, very difficult. I spent a lot of time on my own, in my bedroom. So I was in a room with 3 other girls, but in the day they would be downstairs and I'd be upstairs because I wasn't allowed out of the bedroom, apart from for meal times. And then it basically just turned into it was a bit institutionalized, if I'm honest, but it did work for me. So we got weighed every morning, and then we had breakfast, lunch and dinner at set times throughout the day, dispersed with set snack times. And all of it was done around, calories. So, I knew exactly at every single meal the amount of calories that I should roughly be having in that meal. And you didn't get choice about the food. You just kind of got given what they wanted to give you. So it was just hospital food, which wasn't great. And then alongside that, after kind of the first 3-4 weeks, I had loads of therapy. So I had a lot of one-to-one support. We did quite a lot of group stuff. And something that really helped me actually was after every single meal time, we'd have, like a 5-minute session where we would talk about the meal that had just happened. And that really helped me to then kind of voice how I was actually feeling about it. So it was kind of, you'd eat the meal and you'd feel really awful about eating it, but then you'd have that opportunity after to actually say, I felt really awful eating it, but I managed to. Mm-hmm. So removing all of that emotion from the food was really helpful. After the first 7 months, I was allowed to go for 1 run a week with one of the nurses. And as I kind of was a long distance runner before I got admitted to hospital, it was something that kind of kept me going, knowing that I'd be eventually, when I got to a certain weight, be allowed to start running a bit again. Mm-hmm. So that was really helpful. And like, it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was an enjoyable time, but there were certainly like times when I was in there and with the girls that I was in hospital with, like we all got on quite well and like we had fun in the evenings. I think the thing I struggled with quite a lot was that I was 17 and all my friends had just started going out, like drinking in clubs and stuff. And I was missing out on all of this stuff. And it kind of frustrated me that I wasn't ever going to have that final year at school where I could kind of do what everyone else does in their final year at school. But yeah, like it was hard, really hard work. And I think the thing that really I struggled with as well actually was my weight seemed to go up really quickly. But the mental side of things just took so long to catch up with that. And I really struggled to kind of process all of that. And there were points kind of along the way where my weight would plateau and you then have to work that bit harder to get the weight back on. So it was like a constant battle kind of every day. And also all the clothes that I'd been wearing were like for really underweight people. So even like having to rethink your wardrobe and stuff like that, it seems like a really easy thing to loads of people, and people were always like to me, oh my God, it's amazing, you can go shopping. But actually, it's like the last thing you want to do when like you're recovering and trying to work out what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah. So after almost a year of being in the hospital, they finally decided to discharge you. Was it, how was the adjustment? Was it difficult?
Yeah, it was. So actually I decided to go straight to university, because I didn't want to be at home anymore. I thought it'd be easier to kind of just leave, have like a complete fresh start. So then I went, so straight to uni, and I didn't get any outpatient care because of the way the NHS works. I kind of just fell through the gap in that transitional period when I turned 18, which was slightly frustrating, if I'm honest. I think what I would have wanted is to have like someone once a week to talk to, and kind of get some extra support. But these things happen, and I was lucky because I guess I managed to kind of keep that really strict routine that I'd had in hospital and quite regimentally stuck to the eating plan they'd given me, which helped me to stay well at that point. I also did quite a lot of work on like my triggers, and also kind of making sure that I felt controlled in other parts of my life. Something that I really struggled with was exercise. And when I first went to uni, it was a real challenge to not kind of exercise at all hours. And there are times actually now where I have to be really conscious that I'm not exercising too much. But I managed when I was at uni to kind of stay on top of all of that. And I guess I began to realize that the friendships that I had at university and were making were like so much better than having this anorexic voice that was my best friend.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it's one thing to go through the amazing journey that you've gone through of personal recovery and kind of working on yourself. It's another thing entirely to start talking about these issues publicly. When did we start doing that? When did we start thinking about talking about things publicly?
I began writing probably a couple of years ago. So I did quite a lot of ad hoc blogging. I did a lot of writing, kind of personal writing throughout my whole recovery. But I never shared any of it up until like the last few years. But in 2016, I relapsed. So my grandma passed away, and I really, really struggled to deal with it. And after she passed away, I couldn't cope with it. I kind of shut everyone off around me, and I began to resort back to not eating as much. I began to exercise a lot more, and became really controlling around the calories again. And after about 4 months of that, my mum confronted me about it. And I referred myself to the Mental Health Trust near where I live. And they weren't able to give me any support because I wasn't underweight enough. And so I got turned away, even kind of with my past history of having had an eating disorder. And at this time, I felt really suicidal a lot of the time. I didn't know how I'd ever kind of get through this. And I realized that actually I'm really lucky because I've got this network of support around me that will kind of help me. They'll kind of be there when I need them to be there. They'll help me with meals and kind of whatever I need. But there's so many people out there who don't have that support. And there are so many people out there who are struggling with food, who aren't so underweight they get support, but they're kind of on the verge of hitting that crisis point and no one's doing anything about it. And so after I recovered kind of the second time, I ended up contacting a couple of publishers because I was so determined to, I guess, share my story to not only help other people, but also to raise that general awareness, but to also get people to think about actually the fact that you can have an eating disorder and look completely healthy. And it's not about kind of what you look like. It's not about what weight you are, but that you can still be struggling with stuff. And so it made it my mission to then try and talk about it. And completely honestly, it hasn't been a completely like easy year with the whole thing. It's been really difficult at times. And people have reacted very differently to me telling my story. And there are times when I do find it really emotionally draining. But then you then have a day where you do a talk and you meet loads of school kids, or you're in like an organization, and you give people the courage to then start speaking out about their mental health and give them the courage that actually if they keep fighting that, especially with anorexia, that voice in your head, then actually you can get to a point where life is really good and you can manage your recovery and things are great. Yeah. So I spent a lot of time, I guess, like doing all of that stuff really helps me kind of stay focused on what I want to do.
Yeah. So tell me about some of the responses you've got so far from writing and talking about your struggle.
Some people don't really understand it, which is understandable, I guess. So I've had some bizarre questions, mainly around food and what food I do and don't eat. Quite a lot of stuff around exercise. So I think people assume that if you've got an eating disorder, you're not going to eat at all and you're going to exercise all the time. So I've been quizzed on all of that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think some people now, I guess they don't always know how to act around me when there's food involved. And that's probably partly I'm more conscious of the fact that people know. People are much more wary about kind of, what they say around me and things like that. And I think as well, for me now, because I've written a book about it, and people who are like close family and friends who've read my book, I feel like actually when they say things that are upsetting around food, or they kind of change a meal plan last minute or something, and it throws me, I feel like they should know not to do that. So it's been kind of a bit of a learning curve, actually for me and probably for people who are close to me. But then like positively, you have people who you then give them the opportunity to then feel able to open up about it. And that's what I love about what I do, is you meet all these people who are struggling, but yet just by me talking to them and kind of all the mental health awareness stuff that goes on, it gives them that courage and confidence to actually feel okay about saying things and talking.
Very cool. So Old Cove Road is about mental health and our sense of community while living in an online world, while living in the age of social media. What do you make of all the eating disorder related things on social media? So ED Twitter, some of the pro-Anna websites, people posting pictures of their bodies, saying that they're fat when clearly they're underweight. What do you make of the eating disorder world online?
So I think it's very dangerous to do it. So anorexia is a really competitive illness, and by sharing those pictures and sharing the weights that people get down to, it will fuel other people who are struggling, whether they've started recovering or whether they're kind of in the depths of an eating disorder. None of it is healthy for them. I think we need to start talking more about recovery, and actually we need to get people to stop sharing images of when they were really unwell to images where they're healthy now, to make sure that people don't feel the need to compare and contrast. I recently asked a group of people actually this exact question about whether pro-Anna websites should be banned, and the response was so mixed. It was quite weird actually, because I assumed that everyone would be like categorically against them as a negative website, like promoting all that negativity is just awful. But actually for some people, for them it offers kind of a bit of relief from like judgment, and their worry is that if people shut these websites down, then the stigma around eating disorders will get worse and people will just become more secret about it, which I kind of agree with in the secrecy sense. But actually we need to, like I said, if we can get these websites more talking about recovery and then offering that safe place for people to talk about recovery, rules around not sharing weights and pictures, then I think that will massively help people to kind of give that online support to each other.
Yeah, very, very well said. Well, Hope, thank you so much for chatting with me. Tell folks where they can find your work.
Oh, cool. So my book is on Amazon, so on the US and the UK and Canada. It's on every Amazon, actually. And it's called Stand Tall, Little Girl. So it talks more in depth about my recovery from anorexia and kind of various coping mechanisms I have developed, and also kind of a bit about my relapse as well. And if you're interested, I've got a Facebook authors page, so that's just Hope Virgo Author. So you can see what I'm up to there, and also on Twitter as just Hope Virgo.